to re-engage on the long-delayed political path towards ending the occupation and resolving the conflict. This must occur in line with international law, relevant UN resolutions, and bilateral agreements in pursuit of a vision of two states, Israel and Palestine, two states, Israel, an independent, democratic, contiguous, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security. Update for you on Yemen. Hans Grunberg, our special envoy for Yemen, has been meeting in Amman over the last few days with representatives from the government of Yemen in the Military Coordination Committee. The meeting that took place last week allowed for an exchange of views on key issues, including different types of ceasefire and ceasefire negotiations. Mr. Grunberg stressed that this engagement lays the groundwork for establishing the necessary conditions for a ceasefire and achieving lasting peace in Yemen. And on Sudan, our Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Sudan, Clementine Nkweta Salami, condemned the shelling and airstrikes on civilian areas in parts of Darfur and Khartoum that we have seen over the last week. Hostilities are widespread and have been reported in urban areas of El Fasher, Al Kuma, and Kapkaya and Kuntum in North Darfur, as well as Nyala in South Darfur and Greater Khartoum itself. Significant civilian casualties have been reported, along with accounts of destruction of homes, markets, and medical facilities. In a statement, Ms. Nkweta Salami warned that armed individuals operating in and around populated areas and camps that shelter men, women, and children who lost their homes because of the conflict are a direct threat to residents. This is blocking the delivery of much-needed humanitarian goods. We can't stress enough that civilians and civilian infrastructure, including hospitals, must be spared by the parties. And just a reminder, Mr. Fletcher is scheduled to brief the Security Council on Sudan tomorrow afternoon in their meeting. Turning to South Sudan, we and our humanitarian partners in the country, together with the government, have launched the Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan 2025. It seeks $1.7 billion to assist about 5.4 million human beings. Nearly 70% of South Sudan's population is projected to require some form of humanitarian assistance next year. That's 9.3 million people. This appeal aims to reach the most vulnerable among them. The people of South Sudan face a range of challenges that are driving humanitarian needs. They include conflict, climate shocks, economic instability, disease outbreaks, and yes, as you can imagine, the impact of war on neighboring Sudan. Since April of last year, more than 900,000 men, women, and children have fled across the border from Sudan into South Sudan, with another 337,000 new arrivals expected next year. And Jean-Pierre Lacroix, the head of our peacekeeping department, is in the Republic of the Central African Republic, where he's continuing his visit. Today, he was in Bambari to engage with local authorities, civil society representatives, and community members, including women involved in politics, as well as colleagues from the UN peacekeeping mission. He visited a site established by humanitarian community called Village Intégré, which hosts 3,600 internally displaced people. Yesterday, he met with the president of the CAR, President Faustin Archange Touadéra, to discuss the enhancing cooperation between the peacekeeping mission and the Central African government on issues including stabilization efforts for the upcoming electoral cycle. He also held discussions with the Prime Minister, Felix Molua, and other government officials, during which they evaluated how the peacekeeping mission there can further support the government's efforts towards peace and stability. Turning to Mozambique, where our humanitarian colleagues, together with our partners, continue to assess the impact of tropical cyclone Chito. Humanitarian colleagues tell us as of today, at least 184,000 people in the country have been impacted, 45 deaths reported, and nearly 500 people injured, mostly in the area of Cabo Delgado province. These are the latest figures from the authorities there. More than 35,000 homes have been destroyed or severely damaged. Almost 50 health centers and nearly 150 schools were also damaged and are no longer functioning. We're mobilizing support for the most affected families in Mikufi district in Cabo Delgado. We, along with our partners, have reached 2,000 families with food, shelter, and other essential supplies. Mobile medical teams are being deployed across most impacted districts to deliver essential health services. Efforts are also underway to combat waterborne diseases by distributing chlorine and water purification material, as well as providing information on cholera prevention. Mobile teams have also been deployed to support unaccompanied or children who've been separated from their families. And turning to another humanitarian crisis, this one around across the globe in Vanuatu, where our humanitarian colleagues tell us the situation remains concerning. One day after the earthquake struck the country, there has been a state of emergency declared for 7 days. To complement national response, the government has requested international assistance. We and our partners are mobilizing resources to respond. OCHA is deploying response teams, including a UN disaster assessment and coordination team. According to local authorities, damage is extensive, including hospitals, residential buildings and public spaces, roads, reservoirs, and gas pipelines. Many communities are cut off. Immediate needs include medical supplies and repair to medical structures, mobile medical teams, search and rescue teams, and heavy machinery for clearing, as well as safe drinking water. I was asked yesterday about Western Sahara and about the reported deaths of 2 Moroccan soldiers in Western Sahara. Our understanding is that the reported mine accident occurred in Tuizgi, which is north of the Minurso area of responsibility, during mine clearance operations conducted by the Royal Moroccan Army. The UN peacekeeping mission in Western Sahara, Minurso, does not have additional information from the Moroccan Army regarding this. The monthly demining reports from the Royal Moroccan Army to the UN peacekeeping mission indicate that in the past months, the Moroccan Army has been conducting clearance operations north of our area of responsibility, including in Tuizgi. Today is International Migrants Day. In his message, the Secretary General says this is a day to remind ourselves of the challenges migrants can face, from prejudice to discrimination to outright violence and abuse, and the unimaginable cruelty of human trafficking. As a global community, he says, we must summon our common humanity and work to reverse these harmful trends, and to flag today that our colleagues in the Department of Economic and Social Affairs tell us that international migration and its linkages to the social, economic, and environmental dimension of sustainable development. It's available online. And today, in a joint call to action, UN Refugee Agency, the International Organization for Migration, and the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, alongside humanitarian operations, called on states to protect refugees and migrants in distress at sea. The call is prompted by the rising casualties that we often talk about here. Each year, thousands of refugees and migrants risk deadly journeys in desperate attempts to escape violence, persecution, or poverty. Double quiz for you today. Latest member state to pay its dues boasts the longest coastline on continental Africa, stretching for way more than 3,000 kilometers. Okay, Africa. Let's start there.
Somalia, what size?
Somalia. Somalia, which brings us to 150. Only how many more to go then if we already have 150? Yes, all right, but that's not the other part of the quiz. If we say shukran to our friends in Mogadishu, what language day is it today?
Arabic.
Exactly, it's International Arabic Language Day. 2 for 1. What? Well, today is international. I just, do you think I make up these notes? I read yeah, no, it's not. Edie, you were way offline. You went to the Americas. We'll start with Deji, you'll go second.
Oh, really? Okay, so...
Oh, sorry, Pam, well, sorry. Go ahead, Deji.
Okay, so first a correction. You said our special envoy for Lebanon, Geir Peterson, actually...
Oh, for Syria. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
okay.
you.
My question here is, just a couple of hours ago, China and India reached a 6-point consensus on the border issues, and they both agree to continue to take measures to maintain peace and tranquility in the border areas and promote healthy and stable development of bilateral relations. Does Secretary General have any reaction on the latest development?
I think we welcome the positive result of this effort of a very important bilateral diplomacy.
And do you think this would set, let's say, an example how to settle international disputes?
Well, I mean, let's face it. We see a lot of international disputes. Well, let me put it the other way around. There are a lot of international disputes that don't get resolved, and we see it around the world. Those get the headlines. But there are a lot of international disputes that do get resolved either through UN mediation or through bilateral efforts. Those should be covered and saluted. Edie, please.
Thank you, Steph. On Israel's denial of access to UN convoy requests, is the United Nations given any reasons? And if so, what reasons are they given?
I'm not aware of any specific reasons, despite security reasons, that are given when things are denied. But I think our guest tomorrow will be able to provide you with a bit more granularity on what the process is and how it goes.
And on Geir Peterson's initiative for a meeting of all of the various parties in Syria to chart a path forward toward peace. How is he going to follow this up? Is he going to set a date? It's sort of an amorphous, floating invitation.
Amorphous floating invitations is what we do best here at the UN. I think he will continue, in all seriousness, he will continue the consultations, and as we do in any of these processes, when we feel things have gelled, dates will be set.
And is he still in Syria?
No, he left today. He left Damascus today.
And what about Tom Fletcher? Is he briefing from here?
No, I think he'll be he's scheduled, I think, to go to Turkey tomorrow, so he'll brief from wherever he is on Sudan. Pam.
I'll follow up on the talks for a ceasefire hostage release. The Israeli ambassador just said at the stakeout the talks are ongoing. Is there any UN person involved in these at all? And what are you hearing? Because there are reports that it's
the Secretary General has been in touch regularly with a number of the parties, including the Qatari Prime Minister, but we are not directly involved in mediating between Israel and Hamas. We do hope for a successful outcome for the sake of the people in Gaza, for the sake of the hostages and their families, and just for the sake of stopping a conflict.
And any indication that it's imminent?
I think no.
Yeah,
I mean, let me just say something. We have no indication beyond what we dutifully read and what you all report.
Thank you.
Madame, and then.
Just to clarify on the high-level international conference on the two-state solution, is that taking place in New York?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Steph, and happy holidays. With regard to the Secretary General, as you said, he's going to do remarks and Q&A tomorrow at the Security Council stakeout. Is he planning to do an end-of-year press conference?
No, he is planning, however, to do a start-of-the-year conference, as he likes to look forward rather than backwards. So we have something scheduled around the 15th to 16th of January. He will first deliver his priority speech to the General Assembly around those dates. Then the next day he will be here sitting down and answering your questions. Yvonne Murray, RTE, Irish broadcaster.
Thank you very much indeed for the full title.
Yes.
Steph, as I'm sure you've seen, Israel has closed its embassy in Dublin, citing anti-Semitism of the Irish government. And the Israeli Foreign Minister said that the actions, double standards and anti-Semitic rhetoric of the Irish government against Israel are rooted in efforts to delegitimize and demonize the Jewish state. Does the Secretary-General have any comments on Israel's decision to close its embassy in Ireland?
It's a national decision that member states take to open or close embassies. We do not have a particular comment on that. Okay, yes, please. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Evelyn. Yeah, yes.
Okay, sorry. Thank you, Steph. Just a brief question on Yemen. That meeting with the Yemenis, which Yemenis? The ones who have Houthis, or?
It's the government of Yemen.
You mean the Saudi recognized government?
It's the government of Yemen that is a member of
to do
the...
with the problems they're having. Okay, thank
Okay.
you. And the SG press conferences, will he take more than 2 questions?
Okay, so let's be clear here. He will do a stakeout tomorrow. That usually around more than 1, less than 10. He will do a press conference here on the 16th of January, and as he usually does, he will sit with you close to an hour and answer a lot of questions. On that note, I'd like to invite you to hear from our guest, Matthias Schmale. Matthias, can you hear us?
I can, Steph.
Great. So, Matthias, thank you for your patience. Thank you for coming here. We will open it up for you to make some opening remarks and then take your questions.
Thank you very much. Good evening again, and thank you for this opportunity. A few hours ago, I came back from a visit to the east of Ukraine. I saw there again, about 10 kilometers from the front line in Donetsk region, the devastating impact the war on Ukraine has had on civilians. In October and November, over 2,180 civilian deaths and injuries were verified. Now, with intense fighting along the front line, lives continue to be totally disrupted, and there is a steady flow of evacuees from the front line. Close to 40,000 people have been displaced from the frontline areas between October and November. Yesterday in Dnipro, I met 2 people in their 70s and listened to their harrowing stories of losing everything. Understandably, they expressed a pessimistic outlook for a better future. Apart from old people like them, a huge concern is people with disability. This morning, I visited a transit center in Dnipro dedicated to them and observed how incredibly challenging it is for people with disability to cope with the traumas and disruptions caused by the ongoing war. Now, having painted this background of misery, I yet again, over these last few days in the East, have been inspired by the incredible strength and dedication with which frontline humanitarian workers and their organizations, volunteers, government officials, civil servants stay to deliver. Close to the front line in Donetsk, I met doctors and health staff in a small clinic supported by our World Health Organization colleagues, providing essential basic healthcare services under incredibly harsh conditions. As you know, we've just entered the 3rd winter since Russia's full-scale invasion in 22, and with temperatures already below freezing in some areas of the country, we are very worried about the impact of continued large-scale attacks on energy infrastructure by the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Governors and mayors across the country are particularly worried in my conversations with them about vulnerable people in high-rise buildings in cities being cut off from heating and clean water, as well as being affected by disrupted sewage systems. The last wave of attacks were on 28 November and 13 December, attacks on the energy infrastructure, that is, and they resulted in extensive blackouts that affected millions of people. Now, while there has been some amazing recovery of energy production capacity, 2 weeks ago, I saw an example of this near Odessa in the south, supported by our UNDP colleagues. The attacks have already severely worsened the dire situation for the most vulnerable populations. As an example, systematic attacks on energy infrastructure endanger and harm patients and health workers due to power outages. They deny patients access to life-saving medical care. If power cuts become more widespread, continue, it may be the tipping point for people to leave their areas of origin within Ukraine, at least possibly across borders. I also want to stress that the prolonged war has not only resulted in physical and bodily harm, it's inflicted widespread trauma and psychological distress among civilians, for example, including essential workers such as teachers. Allow me also to mention my concern as humanitarian coordinator for the plight of civilians in the temporarily occupied territories. We should not forget them. I saw humanitarian actors implementing what we're calling the Humanitarian Winter Response Plan to address emergency needs by delivering solid fuel, providing cash for winter to ensure people can stay warm, and ensuring water systems then continue to work. We need some $500 million for full implementation by March 2025. And coming to a closure in January, we will launch the Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, outlining our goals for the number of people we aim to assist and how we intend to reach and assist them next year. In the Ukraine, the most vulnerable populations are bearing the brunt of the war. And we think that 12.7 million people are expected to require assistance next year due to the continued war. We are preparing an appeal for $2.2 billion for the humanitarian work, while we also will keep early recovery, such as education and emergencies, going. In conclusion, we must not normalize the war in Ukraine. The guns must fall silent, and there must be peace with accountability and justice served in full respect of the UN Charter and the territorial integrity of Ukraine. Back to you.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. You just got back from the East and near the front lines. How many civilians are actually still living right near the frontline areas in the East? And what kind of preparations are you making for when this conflict ends? We've all heard that President-elect Trump has said he's planning to end the war in Ukraine in one day. What kind of humanitarian preparations are you making for whenever that happens? Thank you.
Should I answer that directly?
Yes, please, go ahead.
So I don't know exact numbers about civilians still close to the front line in Donetsk, where I was. There's a couple of 10,000, so it's relatively small numbers, but still sizable. And as I mentioned earlier, it includes particularly old people and people with limited mobility. In terms of, I can get you more exact numbers if you wish across the whole front line. In terms of preparing in humanitarian terms, if the guns fall silent, I want to stress, first of all, again, that it's very much our position as UN that this has to be within respect for the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So it has to be a just peace, not just the guns falling silent. If that were to happen, and of course we hope for a just end of this, then there will be a number of huge challenges. I don't know if we can call them humanitarian in nature only, but an example that I hear a lot about is veterans that need to be properly supported and integrated into society. Another issue will be that the considerable number of people fighting on the front line will return home, and again, will need to be supported in many ways, including mental health support and in terms of being reintegrated into the society, finding jobs and so on. And then maybe a final point is, as you will know, there's a considerable number of IDPs, 3.8 million, we think at least, and their future will have to be carefully supported. There will be quite a number of them that will not be immediately able to return home because Ukraine is one of the heavily mined countries, maybe the most heavily mined country in the world. So it won't be as easy as saying guns are silent, return home. There will have to be considerable work which has started in terms of demining as a precursor for people returning to normality. So I hope I'm giving you a flavor of what we are thinking of course, led by government and with many other partners.
Yes, thank you. Before I give up the floor, could you explain the humanitarian appeals that you mentioned? You talked about $500 million needed until March. What appeal is that from? Because that goes into 2025, and then you mentioned a separate appeal for 2025. So I think some of us, including me, are slightly confused.
Yes, thank you. Good question. I was initially too when I came here. So we do our annual appeals per calendar year. But because the winter stretches across, obviously, 2 years, we extract from this year's appeal what we need to do specifically in winter and project that into the end of winter, into early March or end March next year. So what we call winterization appeal is an extract from this year's appeal and an anticipation of next year's appeal, if that makes sense. Now, for the winterization support, so covering already the last 2 months and the next 5 or so, or 4, we need another $500 million to complete the work and reach 1.8 million people. And then the remaining work, and especially January to March, will be part of next year's appeal, where we are asking for 2.1 or 2.2 billion for roughly 12.7 million people. So I hope that makes some sense. There's a winterization appeal that is an extract from this year's appeal and an anticipated part of next year's.
Thank you. Maggie, please.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Schmale. It's Margaret Bashir from Voice of America. Just quickly to follow that up. So the 500 million is part of the 2.2 billion, or it's in addition to it? I understand you're separating it, but is it part of the 2.2?
Yeah, it is.
It is. Okay,
so
great.
So part of it, yes.
Okay, I just wanted to be extra sure. And then yesterday, I'm sure you're aware, there was an assassination of a Russian general inside Russia. There's a lot of concern about what the retaliation may be in Ukraine for that. You've been talking a lot about energy infrastructure. Some experts on television have been saying that could be a potential target. Do you have any additional concerns about potential attacks in the coming days in retaliation for this attack? Thank you. Assassination.
Yes, I do have concerns because sadly the pattern has been that when something happens, the armed forces of the Russian Federation retaliate. And so I think, this could be used, what happened yesterday, as a reason for further strikes. I think I said earlier, we are anyhow concerned that if the attacks continue, and I mentioned 2 waves of attacks very recently, including this month, if those intensify and the rationale is retaliation for what happened yesterday, the impact on civilians will be devastating. And that's why I called at the end of my reflections for an end to this madness.
Thank you. Evelyn, please.
Yes, thank you. Evelyn Leopold. Is there a continuation of children being taken or abducted to Russia?
I don't know if this is ongoing. I know that the government is very clear, supported, and working with partners in the international community that there are considerable numbers of abducted children in the Russian Federation under their control. And the focus that I hear a lot about is returning them. I haven't really heard about new cases in recent times, but I don't know this for sure.
Okay, danke.
Thank you, please.
As a follow-up to that, it's Pamela Falk from U.S. News. Thank you, and World Report. Thank you for the briefing. On the children that have been abducted, there have been a few hundred returned out of what's estimated to be about 20,000. Have you been in contact? Is there any attempt to find housing, or are they sort of scattered about with families?
To the best of my knowledge, I personally haven't been. There are parts of the UN system that on request of government help with this as part of regular program. And since we're talking children, it's in particular UNICEF, of course. In my understanding, what they try to do is to integrate people, children who come back are brought back into their regular programming. So, you know, the attempts to keep education going, the attempts to provide mental health care support, and obviously children who've gone through an experience like that will be particularly traumatized. So, to the best of my knowledge, as part of ongoing activities, agencies like UNICEF are trying to provide support in close collaboration with the authorities.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do we have any further questions? I think that's it. So, Mr. Schmale, thank you so much for your time here today. And this space is always open for you, as you know. Thank you so much for it, and have a great day. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Goodbye to New York.